Coucou, bienvenue from France. I'm happy to be here today. It is a really lovely spring day. We actually got our pool working this past weekend, so I'm really excited about that. It's rare to have a pool that's heated in Provence. Most of the pools are not heated because it gets really hot in the summer, but for April, May, it's perfect to have a heated pool because the kids can swim and the water feels like a bathtub. So very happy coming off of a fun weekend swimming. So that's always a good thing. And today I thought it would be helpful to take a minute to kind of talk about what goes on in our minds and how the French are very different in mindset than myself I can speak to as an American. And so for those of you who have been listening to the podcast for a while, I'm just going to do a quick refresh. I'm Kim. I moved from California about 3 years ago to Aix-en-Provence with my husband and our two children who are already 7 and 9 years old. So since moving here, I've been on a bit of a journey. So I was in very intense corporate jobs for a long time. And since moving here, I thought it would be a good journey to kind of figure out a better version of myself and get to know myself more deeply and really discover kind of what gives me like real purpose and passion. And so that has been, and that will probably be an ongoing journey. But as part of this, I started to realize that there's these, I just want to call them traps that we constantly fall into. And these are things that exist in our minds, but they keep us feeling small and stuck in a life that may not be best for us. And so I started to write down these things that were kind of holding me back. And I thought it would be helpful if I shared them with you today and also kind of compare and contrast how French women don't seem to fall into these as much and why they don't. And I have ran this by a couple of my French friends and they definitely have agreed with these as well. So I think we can find this pretty interesting. So the conversation topic today that I want to talk about is traps that French women don't fall into and how we can really start to think about these traps and how to avoid them. And so I'm just going to tell you my situation on a normal, let's just call it Monday morning. So my alarm goes off, and before my feet even touch the floor, my mind is already racing. I have a to-do list that seems to be just forming automatically, what the kids need for school, emails I need to answer, work I need to make progress on, groceries, laundry, what's going on this week in terms of schedule. I'm sure a lot of you can relate, but I didn't really like this feeling because I realized by the time I even get to the kitchen to even start coffee, like my body's kind of still waking up, but my mind is like miles ahead of that present moment. There have been mornings that I don't even remember making a coffee because I have just been in like autopilot in my mind. And this still happens. And I'm almost 3 years into my journey living in France. But in the US, it actually used to be worse for me. So it would carry this kind of idea of like, it would be rushing and anxiety coupled together. So like we had two young kids that were very young then, and they're two under two for a long time. And we were always like getting ourselves out the door to our, corporate jobs. And so it would be like, oh my gosh, rushing like right away, getting everything in order in a super fast pace. And I'm happy to say I don't go to a corporate office anymore. I work from here. But I still, and I'm, by the way, definitely grateful for that every single day. But what I realized is that my racing mind like hasn't really fully left me. So even now, this like conditioning is still coming in every Monday morning, about being productive, getting ahead, accomplishing things. And I have been working hard to try to interrupt that pattern. And so one of the things I've been trying to do is after the kids leave for school, I come back inside and I give myself 15 minutes. I literally set a timer at the same time I boil 2 hard-boiled eggs for my breakfast that day. And I light a candle. I turn on my favorite, I listen to this quiet coffee mix and I sit in my favorite chair with my coffee and I take 3 deep breaths and I open my journal. I know that seems like a lot to do, but it's actually just kind of a nice routine. And I start writing, like no agenda, no editing, just whatever comes into my head. And this morning when I was filling my pages, like something struck me as I was writing this. So after even all of these like changes we've made, moving abroad, no longer having a full-time corporate job, I'm realizing I still fall into a lot of these same quiet traps. And I think the difference is like I can actually see them now. And I think once you see them, it becomes harder to fully live inside them and just allow them to overcome your mindset every day. And so I want to talk about 6 of the traps that I feel like are very common that I don't see French women falling into as much, but I definitely see myself having falling into these. So I'm going to go through those traps for us today and just kind of compare and contrast and think about how we can maybe avoid some of these traps as we go through our days. So trap number 1, believing your worth is measured by your productivity. Wow. Okay. This one runs deep. So I am an overachiever. I worked really hard my whole life believing that getting the best grades and getting into the best schools made someone very worthy and successful. And trust me, you can surround yourself with people like that and be very validated. And I can even say, like, I went to Harvard Business School, and that essentially thrives on this type of mentality that like your worth is measured by how productive and how well you do in life. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but I realized it just no longer suits me. It doesn't make me feel happy. It doesn't make me feel like the best or whole version of myself. And I was recognizing it. And so much of this is based on our professional lives. And, did we accomplish what we needed to do? Did we do it well? Are we continuing to move up? Did people recognize my work? And for me, like that was one way of measuring, I would say, like my worth. But I realized it wasn't just about my professional life. It was spilling into every single aspect of my life. So even just little things about being a mother or being a wife or being a friend or being a daughter. So I would like the things that would go through my head is like, did I cook a good dinner? Were my kids happy today? Did I finish everything that was on my to-do list? Did my daughter study enough for her spelling test? And some days it was just like constant measuring and evaluating. And, it's like, am I accomplishing enough? Am I doing it well enough? And I think living here in France has made me question this more deeply. And when I talk to my French friends about this, they do not measure their worth by how much they accomplished or how much their kids accomplished or like, were they productive that day? They kind of were almost laughing at that mentality. Their confidence is just much quieter and more internal, and they're a lot less dependent on kind of the external validation that I feel like has been and honestly continues to kind of be extremely important for me. And so the French women that would actually say being like overly productive or the best at everything does not make them like more worthy or more successful. In fact, they would say it's just the opposite, that if they take good care of themselves and they feel like a whole person, that is success. And honestly, I love that. I'm trying to do a little bit more of that in my life because I realize like I can't be the best mother, the best wife, the best employee, the best daughter, the best blah, 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 without kind of like losing a bit of myself in that process. And so I'm trying to sort of think about how my self-worth really shouldn't be determined by how much I accomplish or how much I please other people. I think I'm realizing it really has to come from something steadier inside me. And honestly, this is something I'm just reminding myself of. I haven't figured out a solution for it, but when I catch myself in that trap, I now just kind of stop and say, okay, I see what's happening. Take a minute and try to just think about like how the French woman would define their worthiness. And it sort of helps me just slow down a bit and not define it by productivity. Okay, trap number 2, believing that you need permission to slow down. So this trap is actually very closely tied to the first trap I just talked about. So if your worth is really tied to your productivity, then when you slow down, you're going to feel really uncomfortable. I know this because even taking a short break used to trigger so much guilt for me. I would hear this voice immediately like, oh, what are you doing? You should be doing this, or you should be doing that. Or I would look around and see something unfinished that I felt like I needed to do in that instant. And I think living in France has made me confront this mindset again and again. So here, like life is just structured very differently. As you know, like stores close in the middle of the day, long lunches are very normal. People are lingering on benches or on sides of fountains, just deeply engaged in conversation. I rarely see people like heads down walking on their phones. And so at first, like this kind of drove me crazy. It was like, what is everyone doing? Like, why aren't we rushing to get to work, to do things, to accomplish things? And now I'm like, okay, that's actually pretty amazing. I see it really differently. I see slowing down as not laziness. I think it's more about creating space and the space to notice life as it's happening. And if you're rushing and not slowing down, you actually don't really notice anything except the like craziness that's going on in your head. And so this space is actually where life's happening, like space to connect with people, space to actually breathe, space to notice things, space to experience gratitude. And it turns out you actually don't need permission to do any of it. Like you can give yourself that ability. And sometimes we just need to stop and look around. And even if it's just for a few minutes a day. So I like this number 2. So just slow down. You can have permission. You have my permission. You don't need it, but you definitely have permission. Okay. Trap number 3, believing happiness exists somewhere in the future. So this is a very classic one that I still find myself doing. And honestly, the French women I spoke with about this said they're actually not really that much better at doing this. They definitely just have a little more like pause and presence and awareness that I think this requires to not live in it. So this is the trap of I'll be happy when fill in the blank. I'll be happy when my job situation gets better. I'll be happy when my kids are a little older and life's a little easier. I'll be happy when we move somewhere new. I'll be happy when life finally settles down a little. I'll be happy when you can see where this goes. And I could fill in this with a lot of things in my own life. And it's super seductive, right? It's like, oh, okay, well, that I'm looking forward to that thing and I'm working toward that thing. And therefore, that's when I can achieve it and I'll be happy. But we all know that this is really just another trap. I like Sophie Beatrice. She writes in her book, This Is How It Feels to Be Seen. She writes, the goal is not to be happy. The goal is to live. Happiness is just a byproduct. And so that line kind of stopped me because if you're chasing down happiness and you think it's going to come when you achieve X, Y, or Z, you're actually missing out on the point of life right now. And it like happiness is actually just in the small moments when we're really present in our lives. And so for me, these small moments are just like a simple walk with my family at night, like, or just after dinner when we're talking about the day and just kind of like living for, even if it's like a 5-10 minute walk when nobody's whining or complaining, like I'll take that. And that's a small, amazing moment. I love conversations like that just kind of, I don't know, I keep reflecting back to a few I've had recently where you just have those like, you can't stop laughing, you're crying so hard moments. And I think those are like few and far between, but moments where life just feels really rich and alive. And then just like my daughter's still little and she like puts her arms around my waist and I can feel her little hands. And it's like I just close my eyes because I feel like that is a moment I want to live in. And so, you know, people always also associate these little moments of happiness with, well, it's just because of a bigger thing. Is it because maybe you moved to France and that made you happy? And honestly, I don't think moving somewhere can make you happy. A place cannot do that for you. But I will say that it has helped me be on this journey to change my mindset and think about these things and live in more present moments. And so like, I would say the experience of living here has changed more like how I move through my life. And that shift has actually created more space for happiness, I would say, to appear more naturally. And I would say like I am happier on a daily basis here, but I think it's more of a byproduct of the actions I'm taking to live a little bit more intentionally. So I hope that helps. Okay, number 4, trap number 4. Believing your logical mind always knows best. So this was another one I used to really, really rely on. Like I trusted logic above all else. It was like, okay, that's a rational decision. This is strategic thinking. That's a practical plan. And beneath all of this noise, there was, and I never listened to it until a lot more recently, this kind of quieter voice. And it's really just your intuition. And it's something that shows up as this whisper if you're not attuned to kind of listening to it more regularly. And you kind of are tempted to ignore it because it sort of sometimes is going against what you think in your mind. And then it's persistent. And then you're like, oh, just getting annoyed by it and you want it to go away. And our minds can get really good at dismissing that little tiny whisper. And we can label it all sorts of things. Well, that's irrational and that's unrealistic. And that wouldn't make the money I need it to make if I took that job, even though there's little whispers saying you should. And I think it's just that our thoughts are really not reliable narrators. I'm learning that time and time again. They're just habits. And so this is a bigger concept that I've been reading a lot about, but our thoughts, like I have been reading books about like how they're really not real and how you can almost just try to separate yourself from your thoughts and imagine them like clouds kind of passing through the sky. Like they appear, they shift, they move on, just like clouds in the sky. And so not every thought you have deserves like to control the direction of your life or what decision you make. And I think sometimes that deeper clarity is coming more from listening to that quieter voice inside of you. And for me, like this helped me really kind of figure out what I want to do with my life and what brings me purpose and passion. And I really had to do this by like sitting alone with my thoughts, even though it was so uncomfortable. And at first I'm like, this is so awkward. But I now am like, okay, that just helps me actually know what's real, what's not, and like what that little intuition is telling me. And then I just try to like take little steps to move toward that little voice so that it becomes less of a whisper and more of something that's just kind of part of me that that the intuition feels stronger and stronger as you kind of give it more space to come alive. So, I think as I was talking to my French friends about this, they just naturally listen to their own intuition. They value like what they think over what someone else tells them. And I think it's really interesting in the French culture, they're not afraid of conflict. Like they will gladly stand up for themselves and what's in their hearts and what they believe is right. And like a cordial disagreement, a debate is actually really highly valued in France. It kind of proves your self-worth in some ways as a French person to have your own beliefs and to listen to yourself and stand up for what you really think is right when someone else doesn't agree. And so I think this is something that as much as like, intuition matters, it's also about like standing up for that when it's in opposition to what other people may be telling you is the right thing to do. And that's the hard part. I think it's one thing to feel it and to listen to it, but then to act against what people around you, especially those you love, such as like parents or, your partner thinks is actually where I think the real courage comes from. And living here, I see a lot of French women do that as if it were nothing. And so I'm trying to take a little clue from them and get a little better at this. All right, number 5, believing you must control everything. So this took me a long time to understand, and I'm honestly still not very good at it. I like to control everything. I feel like control is my safety net. Like if I plan enough and if I prepare enough and if I anticipate every possible outcome, then maybe in my mind, I think, oh, well, nothing can go wrong because I've been prepared and I planned and I catastrophized what could happen and I planned for that. And really, I think control for me is just a way to try to eliminate uncertainty. I don't love uncertainty. My husband is at the opposite extreme. He could live in like a very uncertain mindset and he loves that. And I am like desperate for certainty. And as you can imagine, that sometimes creates conflicts in our marriage. But I do think it's something I like admire about him that I want to get better at because uncertainty is actually just part of life. Like whether we accept it or not is our choice. And I am so bad at this one. So just an example, like big things, little things, like my husband, when he first suggested moving to France, of course, my first instinct was complete resistance. There was just too much uncertainty, too many things I couldn't control. And I felt like if I like tried to control something like this big of a decision, I couldn't do it. And so that was holding me back when really like that taking that like move and making that big decision was actually one of the most important things I could have done. And being more comfortable with living in uncertainty just makes your life a lot better. And I think if we, like, the more tightly we just try to control everything, it's like the more anxious we become. And inevitably, life is going to move in a different direction than we've tried to control and plan for. And therefore, then we're disappointed. And so I'm really working on this. And I think the one alternative I have found is just trust. And I know that sounds like such a basic comment, but like it's really about trusting in myself. I trust now more in the unfolding of life and how it's meant to be instead of fighting against it. And I just sort of trust now that things will work out in ways that I could not have predicted. And I think that has been a big shift for me. And that was a big thing from moving here that I've learned. Like I could not have predicted that we would have moved to France and ended up staying here. And I think it's been one of the most amazing things I've done in my life and for our family too. And that's not something I could have predicted, and I wouldn't have been able to control for that. So I'm kind of trying to let go of that resistance. If you can, it opens doors to things much richer than you could have imagined or planned for. And so this is a big one, but if you can just try, I would say, to stop trying to control everything and let go a bit, it definitely helps. Okay, trap number 6, our final trap. Choosing a familiar misery over an unfamiliar possibility. This kind of goes hand in hand with the one I just mentioned. And this is a phrase like I think about often. So there's this phrase that I'm sure you've heard before, but our minds will always choose a familiar hell over an unfamiliar heaven. And it's so interesting because this goes back generations of our brains being wired to keep us safe when there were literally predators attacking humans. And it's not like our brains have been completely reprogrammed to stop this pattern and instead make us fulfilled. So it's like on us to kind of figure out, like our brains are going to naturally steer toward what's known. And even if like the known right now is not making us happy, it's like the unknown feels too risky. And I lived in this for such a long time. And the example that comes to my mind most prevalent is a lot of like jobs I had, I was not happy in. And these were like jobs that looked great on paper, jobs that paid well. And I just would wake up, I'd have the Sunday scaries. I would like literally just try to get through the week. And yet I would stay. And I would stay because this familiar hell felt more safe and less scary than this unknown, which felt very risky. And like, even if it could have been heaven, I was too scared to do that. And so I think if we do that though, if we take that risk, like that's where the growth happens. It really does. And every time you take one little small step outside of your comfort zone, I think something really interesting happens. It's kind of like your world gets bigger and you're able to sort of see things in a different light. And then that version of yourself that was sort of stuck there slowly kind of begins to expand. And then that next step outside of your comfort zone feels a little less scary. And slowly you're not living in that familiar hell anymore. And you're starting to get toward that path of unfamiliar heaven that doesn't feel so unfamiliar anymore. And so I think that's just one of those things, like taking big steps, taking little steps, all matter to try to just not continually allow yourself to choose the familiar if you're not happy with it. So what does this mean for us? Okay, so I think this is the interesting thing that I came to realize. The weird thing about these traps is it's not like recognizing them and writing about them and me talking about them is going to make them go away. In fact, I gave you a lot of examples. These still come up constantly for me. They came up this morning, like just in a million possible ways. And the difference is now I kind of see them and I'm seeing them and they're small, but like it's powerful to be able to see them, because what happens then is you can actually pause and ask yourself a question. So now what I try to do is like just two simple questions I'm going to leave you with. So when you have one of those thoughts that may be one of these traps, ask yourself, like, is this thought actually helping me live the life I actually want? Or is this just another story my mind has learned to repeat? So I'll repeat that because I think it's really good if you can remember these things. So is this thought helping me live the life I actually want? Or is this just another story my mind has learned to repeat? Most days when you do that, the answer becomes really clear. And for me, I'm taking a breath when this happens and I'm just a little more aware. And I'm also a little more observant now of how French women aren't as susceptible to these. And some of them are human nature and some of them are just sort of deeply ingrained in us. But others, I think we can really work on so that our mind isn't racing with sort of unhelpful thoughts and worn out beliefs. And so as much as you can, I would say take out that journal, figure out ways that, these traps aren't as pervasive in your head, because they really just live in our minds. And I just wanted to share this episode with you because I think just the recognition and awareness of them has really helped me. And it's also helped me to kind of understand that it's a bit cultural, that not every culture has these traps in such a, I would say, immense, grandiose way like I do. And so please let me know what you think. Let me know other traps that you find yourself falling into that might be helpful for others to hear, that we can all work on together. So thank you so much. Au revoir. Don't forget to listen for next week's episode. I'm trying to do new episodes every Thursday. And please follow us on cuckoo.pod. Okay. Thank you. Au revoir. Bye.